Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying this video. Story 1. I was 17 when I took the babysitting gig for the Parkers. They lived in one of those quiet cul-de-sacs where the lawns are perfectly mowed and the porch lights flicker just enough to give you the creeps if you stared too long. Nothing exciting ever happened there, or so I thought. The job seemed easy. 2 kids, Ellie and Max, already tucked into bed by the time I arrived. All I had to do was sit on their leather couch, snack on pretzels, and maybe watch a movie. It started as one of those nights. Calm, boring even. Around 10:30, the opening credits of some cheesy rom-com were rolling when I heard it. The crunch of footsteps on the gravel driveway. It was faint at first, like someone trying to tiptoe, but not quite pulling it off. My first thought was, oh, the Parkers forgot something. I went to the front window, pulling the curtain aside just enough to peek out. But no one was there. Just their mailbox standing crooked in the moonlight, and the street beyond, quiet and empty. I told myself it was nothing, maybe a stray cat or a raccoon. I settled back on the couch, though I kept the remote clutched tight in my hand. Then I saw it. Movement, not on the TV, but in the corner of my eye, through the kitchen window. A shadow gliding past, quick and deliberate. My heart stumbled over itself, and I froze, straining to hear over the awkward dialogue blaring from the screen. Calm down, I whispered to myself. My voice sounded small, even to me. Still, I grabbed my phone and dialed Mrs. Parker. Straight to voicemail. Of course, because things only go to voicemail when you're alone and freaked out. And then it came, a sound so soft it might have been imagined if it hadn't sent every nerve in my body into overdrive. Tap, tap, tap. It was coming from the sliding glass door at the back of the house. I stood up, phone in one hand, the other gripping the remote like a weapon. Slowly, as if every creak of the floorboards was betraying me, I crept toward the kitchen. My stomach twisted tighter with each step. I wanted to tell myself it was nothing, just a bird, maybe a branch swaying in the breeze. But deep down, I knew better, and then I saw him, a man, standing on the other side of the glass. His face pressed against it so hard, I could see the smudges his nose made. He didn't move. He just stared. His face was pale, almost too pale, with a grin that didn't belong on a human being. It stretched unnaturally wide, as if someone had carved it into his face with a knife. His eyes, though, his eyes were the worst. They weren't looking at me. They were looking through me, as if he could see something I couldn't. He raised a hand, slowly, and waved. Not a friendly wave. A slow, deliberate wave, like he was mocking me. My body acted before my brain could catch up. I spun around and bolted upstairs, taking the steps 2 at a time. Ellie and Max. The kids. I had to get to them. Max's room was closest. I yanked open the door and found him sound asleep, his thumb tucked into his mouth. Ellie's room was at the end of the hall. She was curled up under a pink comforter, her stuffed rabbit clutched to her chest. I shook them both awake, trying to keep my voice steady. "We're playing a game," I whispered, lying through my teeth. "We're gonna hide in the bathroom, okay? Quiet as mice. Don't make a sound." Max rubbed his eyes, confused but too groggy to argue. Ellie nodded, clutching her rabbit tighter. We shuffled into the upstairs bathroom, locking the door behind us. The kids huddled in the bathtub, and I crouched by the door, phone trembling in my hand as I dialed 911. The operator's voice was calm, too calm. She asked for the address, details, reassured me that officers were on their way. But every second felt like an eternity. Max started to cry softly, his sniffles barely muffled by Ellie's shushing. Then came the sound, slow, deliberate footsteps on the stairs. He was inside. I covered Max's mouth, trying to calm him, trying to keep him silent, though I felt like screaming myself. The footsteps stopped right outside the bathroom door. A shadow moved under the crack. My heart pounded so loud I was sure he could hear it. Then came a knock. Not loud, not frantic, just a knock. 3 times, evenly spaced. "I know you're in there," a voice called, low and sing-songy, like he was talking to a child. Come out, wherever you are." The doorknob jiggled. I held my breath, praying he wouldn't try harder. Then, as quickly as it started, it stopped. Silence. Heavy, oppressive silence. By the time the police arrived, the man was gone. They found the back door unlocked, though I was certain I had locked it earlier. Outside, in the backyard, were footprints in the dirt, leading away from the house and into the woods. The officers searched but found nothing. The Parkers installed cameras the next day. Weeks later, they sent me a clip they'd found on the footage. It showed the man standing in the backyard for hours, just standing, watching the house. He hadn't just shown up that night. He'd been there, waiting, long before I even arrived. I never babysat again. Story 2. When I agreed to babysit for the Connors, I thought it would be an easy gig. They just moved into the old Mitchell house on Sycamore Street, a hulking Victorian relic with peeling paint and windows that seemed to glare like soulless eyes. The place had always looked abandoned, but when the Connors moved in, they'd done their best to make it seem cheerful. Flower boxes on the windowsills, a fresh coat of pale blue paint on the front door. But it still had that old house smell, a blend of damp wood and time, like secrets left to rot. The parents, Emily and Rob, seemed nice enough. They hovered a little as they showed me around, pointing out emergency numbers, Molly's favorite snacks, and the bedtime routine. But then, Emily's voice dropped as she gestured to a heavy wooden door at the end of the hall. "Whatever you do, don't go into the basement." I raised an eyebrow. "Why not?" Rob, standing behind her, avoided my gaze. "It's just not safe," he muttered. "The floorboards down there are unstable. We haven't had time to sort it out." I nodded, filing the warning away. Basements were never on my to-do list anyway. Molly, their 6-year-old daughter, was a sweet, chatty kid with big brown eyes and a stuffed rabbit named Mr. Hops she clung to like a lifeline. After dinner and a quick episode of Bluey, I tucked her into bed. She asked for a story, but I could tell she was fighting to stay awake. "Good night, Molly," I whispered, switching on her night light. "Good night," she mumbled, already drifting off. The house settled into silence as I made my way back downstairs. I curled up on the couch with a paperback, the dim floor lamp casting just enough light to read by. That's when I heard it, a soft, rhythmic thumping. I froze, my finger hovering above the next line in my book. At first, I thought it was the house. Old homes make noises, right? Expanding wood, pipes groaning, the usual. But this was different. It was deliberate. Thump, thump, thump. It was coming from the basement. I set my book down, straining to hear. The noise stopped. I waited a few moments, my heartbeat loud in my ears, but the sound didn't return. Shrugging it off, I went back to reading. Minutes later, it started again. Thump, thump, louder this time. I stood, glancing toward the hallway. The door to the basement was closed, just as the Connors had left it. The noise grew more insistent, like a fist pounding against wood. Thump, thump, thump. I should have called the Connors, but something, curiosity, stupidity, propelled me forward. The air seemed heavier as I walked down the hall, each creaky step amplifying the pounding in my chest. When I reached the door, the thumping stopped. I stood there, hand hovering over the doorknob. That's when I heard it, a voice, faint and raspy, like someone struggling to speak through a throat full of dust. Help me. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over my own feet. My mind raced. Was this some kind of prank? A recording? Help me. The voice came again, desperate. Screw curiosity. I turned and bolted upstairs, straight to Molly's room. She was sound asleep, her tiny chest rising and falling in the glow of the nightlight. I locked the door behind me and sat on the floor, clutching my phone like a lifeline. The house fell silent again, too silent. Every creak of the floorboards made me jump. Shadows stretched long and sinister across the room. I kept my eyes on the door, half expecting it to burst open. When the Connors came home, I met them at the door, practically shaking. There's something in the basement, I blurted out. Emily's face went pale. Rob's hand tightened on her arm. We don't have anything in the basement, she said quietly. It's been sealed off for years, Rob added, his voice barely above a whisper. I didn't know what to say. I just stared at them as they exchanged a look that said far more than their words ever could. I left that night with my nerves in shreds. A week later, the Connors packed up and moved out without warning. The house sat empty again, its windows dark and accusing. Sometimes I think about that voice. I hear it in my dreams, begging for help from the shadows of my mind. I wonder what would have happened if I'd opened the door. Then again, maybe I'm better off never knowing. Story 3. It was one of those crisp Friday evenings, the kind where the chill in the air seems to cling to your skin, no matter how tightly you wrap yourself up. I was 17, fresh-faced, eager for a few extra bucks, and foolish enough to think babysitting was an easy gig. I was wrong. The family I was sitting for lived in an old, creaky house on the outskirts of town. The kind of house with windows that didn't quite close all the way and doors that groaned when you pushed them open. Clara, the 8-year-old girl I was looking after, was a sweet, quiet thing. But there was something about her that felt off. Maybe it was just her quietness or the way she looked at me, like she knew more than she should for her age. When I arrived, her parents were already rushing out the door, leaving me with a stack of instructions. The usual stuff. No candy before bed. Keep the door locked. Don't answer the phone. But there was one thing that stood out. Her mother looked me dead in the eye and said, "Whatever you do, don't touch Maggie." I blinked, not quite sure what she meant. "Maggie," I asked, trying to keep my voice light. "Her doll," Clara's mother said. "She sleeps with it, and we don't move it. Understand?" I nodded, more out of politeness than understanding. What could possibly be so bad about a doll? They left quickly after that, leaving me alone with Clara. She was sitting on the couch, her legs curled beneath her, eyes glued to the television. It was some old cartoon, nothing special. She glanced up at me for a second and then back at the screen, like she didn't even care who was there. But when she spoke, her voice was soft, almost shy. "Maggie doesn't like it when people touch her." I turned toward the chair beside Clara's bed, where a porcelain doll sat, propped up on a small pillow. Maggie, I assumed. Her pale face seemed to be watching me from across the room. Her glassy eyes glinted in the dim light, and her frizzy brown hair framed her face in a way that reminded me of something out of a bad dream. "Okay," I said, forcing a smile. "I won't touch her." Clara nodded, but didn't seem to relax. Instead, she got up and shuffled to her room. At bedtime, Clara did something that sent a shiver down my spine. She knelt by the doll, kissed it on the head, and whispered, "Good night, Maggie. Protect me." I was sure I heard her mutter a little more under her breath, but I couldn't catch it. She climbed into bed and turned to face the wall, pulling the covers up to her chin. The room was eerily quiet for a while. I sat down on the couch, my eyes drifting back to the doll. Maggie sat there, still and lifeless, just staring. I tried to shake the thought that her eyes might move. I had to remind myself that this was just a doll, nothing more. The house seemed too quiet for comfort. I had barely settled into a movie when I heard it. Laughter. At first, I thought it was Clara. Maybe she had woken up, thought of something funny, and giggled herself back to sleep. But as the laughter continued, I felt a tightening in my chest. It wasn't a child's laugh. It was high-pitched, something almost wrong. I muted the TV and listened closely. The laughter stopped, replaced by the faint sound of footsteps. My heart raced. I crept toward the stairs, trying not to make a sound. When I reached Clara's door, I peered inside. The room was dim, but I could make out the shape of her small bed, the lump of Clara curled beneath the covers. And there, sitting upright on the bed, was Maggie. I blinked, rubbing my eyes, certain that I was seeing things. The doll had been in the chair just moments ago. I stepped into the room, feeling the cold air shift as I approached the bed. Clara slept soundly, oblivious to the shift in the room's atmosphere. But Maggie was no longer sitting still. The doll was facing me, her lifeless eyes now staring directly at me. I took a deep breath and decided to play it off. Maybe Clara had moved her. She was a kid. She might have done it in her sleep. I walked over, gently picking up the porcelain figure, and set it back on the chair. It didn't feel right. The weight of it seemed heavier than before, but I told myself it was just my imagination. As I turned to leave, something stopped me. A whisper, "Don't touch me." My blood turned to ice. I froze mid-step. My mind raced, desperately trying to explain what I'd just heard. Maybe it was Clara talking in her sleep. But no, it wasn't her voice. It wasn't the soft sound of a child's sleep talk. Slowly, I turned around. Maggie's head had tilted slightly to the side. Her glassy eyes were fixed on me, watching, waiting. My stomach churned. My feet were frozen to the floor as I stared at the doll. The room grew colder, and I could feel my breath fogging in the air. I wanted to run, but I couldn't move. I bolted. I dashed out of the room and grabbed my phone, hands trembling. My mind was a blur, my heart thumping in my chest as I called Clara's parents. I don't even remember what I said, but I know they could hear the panic in my voice. They arrived an hour later, looking more concerned than I had ever seen anyone look. Clara was still asleep, but her mother's eyes scanned the room like she was searching for something. "We've been meaning to get rid of that doll," Clara's mom said, her voice trembling. "Clara says Maggie keeps her safe, but I think Maggie keeps us trapped." I didn't understand what she meant at first, but then she continued, her words slow and heavy. "Every time we try to get rid of it, Clara refuses. She says Maggie is her protector, that the doll watches over her. But something about that thing, it feels wrong. We try to throw it away, but it always comes back. She won't let us get rid of it. She says Maggie gets angry when she's alone." I looked at the doll one last time, and I swear I saw it blink. They moved out a few days later. The house was empty by the time I went back to pick up my things. But Maggie was still there, sitting in that same chair, watching, waiting. I never went near a porcelain doll again. Not after that night. Not after the way those glass eyes seemed to follow me wherever I went.